Today on the PIO podcast, I'm joined by Kate Eller, founder of Rome Communications. Kate is known for helping organizations cut through noise and communicate with clarity, purpose, and impact in a time where trust is fragile and attention is limited. Her perspective on what actually works and what doesn't is more relevant than ever. We're going to dig into messaging, credibility, and how communicators can simplify their approach without losing their battle. Kate, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Robert. I really do appreciate it.
No, I appreciate you being on this show because you have, like we talked about before we started, you have a lot of background, you have a lot of experience, and you know what you're doing. And I think our listeners are going to find some great value out of what you do and what you know. So first of all, I want to talk about how you got to Rome Communications. What started that, and what problems were you trying to solve with creating it?
Yeah, it's really a funny story because it's doing exactly what I told myself I would never do. So I had started my career at Fleishman Hillard, which is a public relations agency. I was doing corporate communications and technology in San Francisco. I then moved in-house at Google. I was there for about 4 years. I met my now husband. He got his job opportunity of a lifetime, but it was in LA before Google had a communications function down in LA. So I left Google. I followed my now husband, and I started looking around for different job opportunities, and just nothing fit. This was well before LA had their tech scene, and so there really wasn't a lot going on. The timing was great for me once it actually hit, but. My husband was the one that really said, you've got the agency experience, you have the in-house experience, go out on your own, give yourself 6 months, give yourself the runway. And, the problem that I kept seeing was that companies, and this still happens, companies are treating communications as an afterthought. It's not part of the strategy. Yep. They basically say, hey, we're going to announce something, we're doing all this product stuff, we're doing all these things. And then 2 hours before, 30 minutes before, they're like, okay, PR people, come along for the ride. Then really just making random acts of PR, announcing things as they come. There's no strategy behind it, no clear reason. They're just announcing things for the sake of announcing things. And I've really wanted to make sure that people are thinking a bigger picture.
Okay, Kat, so just so you know, this is no different than public sector, because public sector communications is always an afterthought. It's always, why do we need to talk to the media ahead of time? Why do we need to think about a strategy here? Why do we need to think about the language that we put in here? Just put a press release out and you're good to go.
Right.
And, that's not good communication. So my question is how do you define good communication today?
Well, I think it goes back to how it should always be. You have your right message, you have the right audience at the right time and through the right channel. It sounds super simple, but a lot of people forget all those different factors. It's really making sure that your audience feels seen. They feel like they're being part of the conversation as opposed to being talked at. And it's making sure that people either understand or are able to take action. So that's what I think.
From a public agency perspective, where do you think they get it wrong?
I really feel like this isn't just an issue for public agencies. I think this is a communications problem across the board. It's writing for yourself as opposed to the person that is either going to be reading or listening to it. It's one of those situations where they lead with the process. Here's how the department has, convened a task force and blah, 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 as opposed to, we've heard you, response times are, in this district, and we're fixing the problem, acknowledging the issue, acknowledging their emotions, making sure that they feel seen, as opposed to, we're just going to run through a time long or a TikTok.
Well, that's you bring it up an interesting point, because a lot of times you get legal that gets involved.
Yeah.
And I said this once in a meeting with a mayor, 2 chiefs, a fire chief and a police chief, and legal. And he says, well, this is what we're going to put out. I go, well, then you put it out. Mm-hmm. I go, I'm not putting out what you're writing, because what you're writing is legal speak, and the public does not want to hear that. The public wants to know what we did and how we're going to fix it. That's what they want to know.
Yeah.
And
They they
he
want to
looked at
feel
me.
like there's a human involved.
Yes, absolutely. And they don't want to hear legal speak. Legal speak is the worst thing in the world that
Yeah.
we can get. It's interesting how you brought up that they don't connect to the audience. Because I was going into that next question with that is how do they get it wrong? Is it because they're not thinking of the audience and they're just thinking you got to put it out because this is the way the individual PR person or PIO thought?
Mhm. No, I think it's really I think people have been trained to do certain things and they're not thinking about how society has shifted, how we have different formats now. It's not just always your strategic, okay, where I'm going to issue a press release or I'm going to issue a statement. It's there's TikTok, there's Instagram, there's Facebook, there are all these other platforms that people are using to communicate that are in more real time. And so you can't sit there and delay conversations. You need to be, it's no longer just one way broadcasting. It's not just sitting there saying, okay, here's what happened and you're going to like it. It's no, we're going to have a conversation so that you feel seen. We are acknowledging your pain. We're acknowledging the issue. Let's find a solution together.
I agree. Shortly before I retired in law enforcement,
Mhm.
it was like 1 o'clock in the morning. I get woken up from dispatch. Hey, there's a fatal car accident that happened from a chase. The car actually struck our station,
Oh.
and the person died. It was a chase from another agency came into our town. And I said, "Has anybody put a holding statement out?" And they're like, "Well, no, why would we do that?" I go, "Has the media started calling yet?" "Yes, they're calling all over the place. That's why we want you to come in." I go, "Okay, I can't log in from where I'm at. I was in a spot I didn't have access."
Mhm.
I said, "Somebody get on and put out a holding statement that we're investigating a motor vehicle crash in the station and more information will be coming soon." That's all I
Yeah,
got to
and
put out.
that timing is so critical. I've dealt with outages with tech companies. I've dealt, so it's nowhere near a fatal accident. But the sooner you acknowledge there is an issue and that you are looking into it, the less likely you are going to feel the hurt later. Because the if you give them that wide berth of making their own assumptions and owning the narrative, that's when you get into trouble.
Look what happened with CloudStrike when they
Hmm.
didn't really talk about what was going on at all. They
Exactly.
just
Yeah.
let
No.
it sit.
You ignore a problem and it doesn't go away. It gets
Yeah.
worse. You
Yeah.
really do need to make sure.
Are we overcomplicating communications as a profession?
I
Did
think
we forget
sometimes,
how to talk to people maybe?
yeah, I think in some ways, yes, you forget that it is a human to human conversation, even if it is over a digital platform. It should be a human to human engagement as opposed to a transaction. It is never a transaction. Communication should not be a transaction.
I completely agree with that. All right. So when you work with clients, where do you usually start? Audience, message, platform? What do you do?
I think you already know the answer based on what we've just been talking about. It's the audience. It's always the audience because you can't create the message unless you know who you're talking to or who you're talking about. So really identifying who that audience is, and sometimes you're going to have multiple audiences, and so the message has to shift. But audience first, then your message. Platform always comes last. Because it could be we're on the question of should we be on TikTok? That needs to be last. We'll figure out the platform, but it really needs to be who are we talking to? Who is going to be listening to our message in the first place?
And I think part of that it goes into understanding what your community is or your client base is.
Hmm.
In
Yeah.
your case, it's different than it would be for a law enforcement agency or a
Hmm.
fire department because we're talking to the whole community, but it depends on the type of incident
Hmm. Oh
where
yeah.
we could be talking to a very specific
Ab-
demographic of the community.
Absolutely.
I think with the whole customs things going on right now,
Hmm.
being able to talk to your undocumented community in a way so that they feel comfortable coming to the police when they need assistance is important, and having a method to communicate with them in an open way is really important. Unfortunately, a lot of agencies struggle with that balance between do I enforce immigration? Do I follow state law? Do I follow, what's human? What's the human way
Right.
of doing
Yeah.
things?
Yeah. People forget what is the human. They forget the human part of communications. Absolutely.
How do you help organizations move from information dump to actual communication?
Mm, that's a good one. Um, Honestly, I feel like the first question I try to ask is, what do you want somebody to do or think differently after they've received the message? Because if you're just throwing a bunch of information, their head's going to explode. They're going to sit there and they're going to start just nitpicking at all the details, as opposed to what are you really trying to get them to understand? What are you trying to make sure that they get out of all the details? Yes, you can and you should be as transparent as possible, but you need to start and end with, okay, here's the big nugget. Here's the headline that you really need to be focusing on.
Yeah, isn't it interesting how, well, in the public sector, and we bury the lead all the time.
Yeah.
We always bury the lead. And PIOs, I saw this just yesterday. An agency had a very big case occur, and they put this press release out, and they actually just posted it to their social media. So it's like a photo of their press release.
Yeah.
I mean, number one, they're hard to read. Number one, nobody looks at them.
Right.
Yeah, nobody looks at them. But it was literally the third paragraph before they actually said what actually happened. They like did it like a timeline of, they responded here and just say what it is.
Well, and in those cases, it can get dangerous, because if you end up putting something so far down, whether intentional or otherwise, people are going to wonder why it's so far down, because the people that truly care about certain issues are going to read the whole thing, dissect the whole thing. And if they see the important bits in the middle or at the very bottom where most people won't get to, they're going to start wondering, did you do that on purpose? And even if you didn't mean to, that there's a lot of implication there.
What's your advice for writing messages that people will actually read and trust?
I mean, just what we were talking about. Lead with what matters, and not just what matters to your organization, but what matters to your audience. Make sure that avoid the jargon. Keep it simple. You want as many people as possible. Lowest common denominator. Simple, plain language. One idea per paragraph. I mean, this is like, language arts 101, back to freshman language arts classes, where it's like just one idea per paragraph. Like we were just talking about, don't bury the lead. Really just make sure that you're keeping the ideas and the information as simple as possible.
It's interesting you bring up one idea per paragraph, and I read these press releases and they come off like, it's a timeline of everything that happened, and the language in there is so third person that it's very hard to follow for the normal person that doesn't write like that.
Right. Well, and if you're going to do that, you might as well do an executive summary at the up at the top, and then say, and we're attaching a TikTok, because that way at least people know this is a chronological incident report, as opposed to a narrative.
And that's why I'm a firm believer that agencies, we're so used to posting to social, getting media releases out or getting information out, that we forget that we have a website. And I have always been a big proponent of creating a blank page that you can immediately become active, and where you dump everything for that incident, and the public can go there, the media can go there and grab everything at one time. Yeah. I've always talked about this. I think it is extremely important. And I think agencies have forgotten about their website a lot of times. Many times placeholders are blank and outdated, horrible stuff. All right. So what is there a simple framework for PIOs to craft a message under pressure?
There should be. I think asking simple questions and answering those. What happened? Keep it very straightforward to the facts. Obviously you don't want it to run like a TikTok, but you do want to make sure that you're including accurate information, very clear facts. Don't put a bunch of opinions or, subjective language. What are you going to do about it as an organization? So this is what happened, what the organization is doing, to resolve the issue. What do people need to know or do? If it's a state of emergency, what do they need to do? What are the actions that they need to be taking? Or is this just an information for your information only? And then kind of what's next? When should we be planning updates? Especially if it's a real time action, knowing, hey, this is a live investigation or this is a live situation. We will be updating you in the next hour. We will be updating you as more information, so that there's no just hanging off. Hey, we'll get around to it when we get around to it, but you actually have some accountability. So making sure that you answer those kind of 4 questions. And then also going back to the whole keeping things simple, write it all down and cut it in half because you're not, and you can always go back to the TikTok. You can always go back and answer questions in more detail. But for the people that just want the high level, keep it very simple and short.
I like that. What's one habit communicators should stop doing immediately?
Ooh, this is a good one. And this isn't just a communicating issue. I think a lot of companies have this issue, whether it's building product, building marketing pages, all those kinds of things, is waiting until something is perfect before sending it. I feel like 85%, 90% pencils down. You got to get that out. You can always apologize for the bad punctuation or one typo or something like that. But I think especially in some of these instances, getting something out there so that people know that you're acknowledging the issue, that you're acknowledging what's happening is more important than it being 110% perfect.
I like that. All right, so let's talk about trust. It's a huge issue right now, especially with the public sector agencies in the world that we're in right now. What actually builds trust in your perspective?
I think what we've discussed earlier is being human, you know, keeping that one-to-one conversation, not dialogue, not a monologue. It's like, you're having that back and forth, that engagement. So keeping things human. You're not defensive. You don't have a bunch of the corporate jargon, removing all that, corporate speak, keeping things very plain language. Consistency. I feel like showing up and making sure that you're kind of keeping that framework of, okay, this is the incident. We're gonna here's kind of how we proceed with, we acknowledge the issue, we investigate keeping that consistency so people know, hey, okay, they're not hiding something, they're addressing it, they know that this is a big thing. So I think those are the big pieces, is keeping it human, keeping things simple, and just being consistent.
Yeah, I like the consistency thing. I think a lot of times we put stuff out only when the big incident happens. We don't put out little things. We don't inform. I'll tell you one thing that I learned years ago. I monitored when X was big, when it was Twitter.
Hmm.
It was very big with the public where they were two-way going back and forth. And
Yeah.
I had somebody hit DM us because of an accident, asking a question. And all I did was put out a map and put out some direction of where to go. They responded back and they said, "I can't believe somebody actually answered my question."
Yeah.
And I think that's important that we answer those questions. I had an incident with American Airlines
Okay.
where we're stuck at a gate. My plane was delayed. We're trying to get into a gate. I can't get into the gate. And I DM'd American Airlines and I said, "I'm on this flight number. We're waiting for a gate. I have a connector that is going to leave in 30 minutes.
Hmm.
I'm at Dallas Airport, horrible airport to
Oh
fly
yeah.
into."
Oh yeah.
And I'm waiting and I'm waiting. And they get back to me. So we notified your gate. There are a number of people that are already on your flight that are going to go to that gate anyways. So you'll be fine. They're going to hold the plane. I was like,
See,
okay.
those little things, it's not building trust, it's building loyalty. People
Yeah.
have lost the art of customer service, and that is a huge part of being a human. It shouldn't be transactional. I mean, my husband and I, just the subscription model of, oh, you subscribe for different things, and then they don't notify you that your order's coming until it's already been processed, and you can't hold it because you're on vacation, and then they're like, oh, sorry, like, I mean, I guess we can refund you your money or you can cancel, and you're like, what kind of service is that? Being able to communicate, having that consistency will win you huge points.
Can you rebuild trust after it's been damaged, or are you just managing the decline at that point?
I I I I'm a firm believer in second chances. Um but it's going to take time. You know, I don't think everybody does. I try to come to most situations with a sense of trust already. It's then if you break that trust, then you have to rebuild it. And that takes effort. That takes consistency. That takes work. So it's just a question of how bad the organization or how bad the human wants it. If they want the trust, they'll work for it. They'll be consistent. They will show up, do the time, so to speak. But like you know, it, I'm not saying it's a no. I think there is always a chance to rebuild that trust, but it is a much harder place to come from as opposed to keeping that trust.
Right. I know a number of agencies recently, and this was not one of the questions that just popped in my head.
Yeah, yeah.
Number of agencies recently have shut off comments
Oh yeah.
to their social media.
Mhm.
And some organizations have done this, regular businesses,
Mhm.
and I find that does a lot of damage because when you don't have the two-way communication back and forth, even if you don't like what they're saying, what if they're telling you something you don't like to hear, that may be telling you that you have a problem that you're not aware of.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I can see two sides on the shutting off comments. Same thing with Google reviews and all that kind of stuff. Is there are a lot of internet tough guys out there that it's like all of a sudden they get one. You get them on a bad day and they just go off on all the platforms. And so from a business perspective, like you certainly want to make sure that you're protected and that you're not being accused of things. I mean, that can do some serious damage to a brand or to an
Mhm.
organization if people come out with false accusations that are not validated. Um, that being said, you also need to make sure that you're able to get that feedback. You need to find some sort of feedback loop that is somewhat public so that people can see, hey, they're listening to us. They understand. They want to improve. Um, so yes, when comments go off, that kind of gives me a red flag. If I'll see some sort of Facebook post where it says comments have been turned off, I'm like, ooh, what happened here? Um, and sometimes it's for the safety of the commenters because there's some businesses or some groups that I'm a part of where they shut off comments because people get nasty and
Yeah,
they're
they
like,
do.
we
Yeah.
do not want to be a part of this. This is not part of our brand. This is not part of our organization. You guys take it, take it out on the street. Don't bring it in here. Um, but it's one of those situations where there's a balance. You need to figure out
Right.
but yeah, the having to turn off comments, even if you don't want to, can cause some damage.
Yeah. Hey, so you deal with a lot of executives in your field. Dealing with internal pressure from leadership wants one thing versus the reality of what you should be saying. How do you handle that?
This one's a tough one because you especially as a consultant, as someone that they brought on, I'm not a full-time employee. Um, this is my job. You brought me in for this particular task. It's kind of, obviously I don't have a law degree, but similar to a lawyer or similar to another field where you bring them in and you're like, would you ignore your legal counsel? On certain issues. Same thing with communications. Would you really want to trust your gut or what AI says, or what's an investor who has no experience in communications, as opposed to someone that's been in the field for 25 years? But you sit there and say, this is my recommendation. This is why I think so. And at some point, you kind of just say, look, I've given my recommendation. There's only so much I can do. This is your brand. This is your business. Um, so, if you're going to go another way, I've set expectations.
I like
But
that.
it's a tough
Hey,
one.
yeah, it is. What's your advice for communicators who feel like they're being asked to spin instead of tell the truth?
Oh, I hate that word. I honestly like anytime that they're like, "Yo, you're spinning." I'm like, "No, I'm not. No, I am not spinning. I refuse to spin." Um, But there is a difference between, spin and strategic framing because, everybody has a different perspective on things. And as transparent as you want to be or can be, depending on are you a public entity, are you a private entity, what type of program you are, there's some things that you just can't share context on.
Right, right.
But whether, maybe it's an active investigation. There's some things you just can't share, whether you want to or not. And so there are those elements that might be important to share, that might change people's perspectives, but you can't share them for certain reasons. So it's making sure that you're giving as much information as possible and just be straightforward that, hey, I'm here to help communicate this as honestly and as strategically as possible. Um, and if they're wanting you to spin it, you just sit there and say, "Look, I'm here for the truth. I want fair and balanced. So if that's not your jam, if that's not what you're wanting to do, then we might have to have a different conversation."
Okay. Let me ask you this: AI in communication. What's your
So,
opinion on it? Should we use it?
I use it every day. I really do. I use it for a lot of different things. Um, but you need to be thoughtful about it. You need to understand what it can and can't do. There are companies that I work with that they push. They're like, use it for everything. And I'm like, yeah, but you still need that human. I mean, I think actually the reason why we connected was because there was a piece in Axios a while back
Hmm.
around
Yep.
communications departments are getting completely cut because people think, oh, I can just put this into AI and they'll spit it out. Always need a human involved. And so making sure you've got the right prompts, you're explaining who the audience is, who you are, what you're trying to convey. Um, you have to have the right prompts. You need to have the right review in the middle, and you should always have a human on the execution part. Um, it should be a tool, but it should not be a strategy. And I use it as a tool every day for a lot of different reasons. I'm a mom of 3. I've got a 16-year-old boy in the house too. So it's, I've got 4 dogs. I've got a lot to juggle. And so there's a lot of decision fatigue. And so I really try to use AI as much as possible for those things that don't need my strategic thinking. Or it can ask me the right questions to then prod me to make certain decisions. It is a tool. It's great for drafting. It's great for brainstorming. But it is not there to make the final call.
Yeah, and it's very interesting how I've seen this shift where I've seen organizations go to AI, and then all of a sudden the AI puts something out that is completely tone deaf because nobody thought of prompts, nobody thought of the audience to put it out to, and then when that message came out, it laid like a like a broken egg. I mean, unfortunately. And I use AI all the time. I use it to help me write.
Mhm.
I'll do something and I'll say, okay, am I missing a perspective? Am I missing a piece of information I should have in here? And it'll look at it, it'll give me suggestions, and I'll go back and rewrite it. And I just did a massive presentation on AI, how to deal with an AI attack.
Mm,
In other words, where your organization or individual officer gets attacked by an agent, by
mm,
an active offender using AI.
yeah.
I I wrote this whole thing out, and I'm like, I'm missing something, and I fed it to to ChatGPT. It came out and said, okay, you have this, but if you really want to go to the next level, you need this and this.
Hmm.
I would have not made that leap. I
Right.
would not have seen it.
Yeah.
So I added that in. I made some changes, and I tweaked a really good executive level training program for PIOs and communicators to deal with an AI attack against an agency. And I gave them a framework of what to deal with. So, I, yeah, I'm a firm believer of it, but there are still people that are afraid of it, and
Yeah.
but they haven't
Well,
used it either. They
uh,
don't know how to use it.
yeah, I was going to say, it's just like, there are certain gardening tools that I refuse to use because I don't want to hurt myself. There are certain tools that you use in everyday life. Some people have the skills, have learned how to use them. Gym equipment. There are some people that should not be using certain gym equipment because they haven't actually been shown how to use it properly. They're going to hurt
Oh my
themselves.
God, did you ever see those people in the gym doing stuff, and you're like, dude, you're in. Oh,
I was a rower in college, so seeing people on the rowing machines, I refuse to go over to that section of the gym because it hurts me every time. But
I
it's what.
watched somebody on one of those, the back for the back machine where you
Oh
lean
yeah,
back and everything.
yep.
I watched somebody they were doing presses with it
Oh,
with their arms. And then, the person actually hand slipped off the roller, hit him right in the face.
oh no.
Luckily it was a pad, so it wasn't really bad, but they ended up with a bloody lip. I kind
but
of snickered.
but it's true. Like I can understand how people would be scared of something that they're not trained to use. They don't know how to use it, and they don't know how to use it safely. So, I think AI training is going to be super important across the board. But the biggest downfall that I've seen from AI is it has ruined the M dash. I used to use the M dash all the time, and I can't use it anymore because people think it's AI written.
And that's true. It's not necessarily always AI written when the M dash is in there. But yes, that is true that it does show up quite a bit in AI writing.
Right.
Absolutely. The other thing about AI that I've seen is we have to have policies, and you have to have
Hmm.
what you're using it for, and
Hmm.
disclose what you're using it for, because if
Yes.
you don't, you run afoul. And oh, that was what I wanted to ask you about
Mm,
AI. What if so you're speaking to your public, you want to talk to the public, but you utilize AI to alter your voice so you're speaking another language?
mm, that's
Does that
interesting.
run into a trust issue? Does it run into do I speculate now as the public? What else are they giving me that's not? that's been altered by AI, do
Well,
you
I
think?
mean, you know, you could sit there and say the same thing about movies that have been dubbed in other languages. Is it the true translation? I actually worked with a language translation company, enterprise level, for many years. And a lot of what they were trying to focus on is how to make sure that the intent remains true, regardless of the translation. Because unless you have a human native speaker, and even then, you might have some subjective translations. And
Mhm.
so when you add AI, you've got Google Translate, and you're like, there's that was Google Translate. There was no way that was that was a human translation. Um, but as long as you disclose it and say, look, the reason why we've AI dubbed this in a different language is to make sure that we get in front of all audiences. So let's say, you've got uh, a community that is heavy on both English and Spanish. You need to make sure that you've got either a spokesperson that can speak in both English and Spanish, or you need to be able to disclose, look, we're doing this using AI to make sure that we are hitting as many communities as possible with our message, especially if it's an emergency.
Right. Yeah, I like that. All right, so coming back to communications, most overrated tactic.
Ooh. Posting everywhere. So TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, all the things. It's like, if you're an enterprise company, do you really need to be on Instagram? Do you really need to be on TikTok? You're wasting time. You're wasting effort. And also, most of the time, all they do is they just copy and paste the same content across all the platforms, and it doesn't work well. The
Right.
algorithms acknowledge, hey, you're basically using something that you wrote for Facebook and shoving it into TikTok, and our format's completely different. So we're going to bog you down. So you don't get the return, and you've wasted a bunch of time. So really honing in on which platforms are where your audience is, that makes the most sense.
Most underrated skill.
Editing. I mean, I'm still of the mindset, like we talked about earlier, pencils down at 85, 90% because you want to get something out the door. But there's some people that they put it in AI, they copy and paste, and they're out the door. They're, next assignment. It's like, no, let's actually review this. Let's read it a couple of times. Let's think this through. Are we talking to the right audience? Is our message the right one? Is it going on the right platform? But people forget that editing spot.
Yeah. Is there a question I should have asked? And if so, how would you have answered a cat? And if you don't have one, that's okay. I covered a lot.
No, yeah, I don't actually have one. You covered quite a
Okay.
bit of ground.
I did. All right, rapid fire questions.
Oh,
You ready?
okay. Yeah,
Phone call, voice memo, or FaceTime? What's your go-to?
phone call. It's easy to pick up the
Stream.
phone and hash things out in 5 minutes as opposed to, the back and forth of Slack and email and sometimes the misinterpretation of tone. So
Mm-hmm.
phone call, just quick, bam it out.
Streaming binge or weekend read? What's your ideal escape?
Both. I love a good book, but if my husband's like, "Hey, let's go watch this," I'm down.
Morning ritual: sunrise workout, quiet coffee, news scroll.
Workout. I need that time to clear my mind, be able to, and also be able to say I completed something. I accomplished something today, regardless of how the rest of my day goes.
You want to know something that was interesting? Now, this goes back, and I'm going to stop this because it
Yeah.
goes back to when my kids were young. And I saw a Navy SEAL colonel say this once in a college graduation, and he says, "If you make your bed in the
Yep.
morning, you will come back to a made bed, comfort, and if that's all you accomplish in the day, you accomplish something."
Yep.
And I would tell it to my kids all the time, and is it funny they make their beds?
So
All right,
true.
if you could adopt any animal, mythical or real, what would it be?
Ooh, well, considering we already have 4 dogs at home, I should probably say no more animals. But if I had to choose, I feel like a capybara. My kids have mentioned them a couple times, in some of the stuff that they're studying in school, and everybody loves them. They have zero drama, and I feel like that energy, I could go for that.
I like that. What's one song that always gets you moving, no matter the mood?
Oh, I'm constantly changing my playlists, especially for my workouts, just to try to make sure I get the most out of it. And I'm like, getting pumped. Right now I'm on a huge like Paramore, Veruca Salt, like late 90s, early 2000s girl rock. But then, I love me some Kendrick and some, actually I've been doing a lot of Jay-Z Linkin Park mashups. So yeah.
Nice. Teleportation or time travel?
Ooh, we talked about this on our last car ride. Teleportation.
It would be so nice.
I love family car rides and all that kind of stuff. But on the way back from a long 12-hour vacation, I'm like, I would love to just blink my eyes and be home.
It would, yes, it would be nice. Roll the dice or play it safe. What's your go-to?
Oh, really depends on the situation, but I feel like I'm more of a play it safe.
What historical figure would you want to shadow for a day, not just meet?
Oh, I've got two. They both actually held the same title, just a couple decades apart. Eleanor Roosevelt and Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis.
Oh,
Um,
interesting people,
and yeah,
yes.
very different styles, very different approaches to being a first lady. But I've read a couple of I wrote a few biographical reports on Eleanor Roosevelt as a kid. I've always found she's interesting, but she's popped up in a couple of books that I've read recently as a central character. So she's kind of been on my mind. And she used communications in such a unique way, especially in such a time period that she was in, where the female voice wasn't heard. Especially the first lady. The first lady wasn't in politics. It's like no, and she leveraged. She had a newspaper article. She had this discipline and this courage that's just it would be fascinating to watch.
Both of those people were incredibly powerful as communicators.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Well, and
All
look
right,
at Jackie O. I mean,
yeah,
she knew when to be public and when to be private, and she kept those very, very distinct. And she used
yep,
it very
absolutely.
subtly.
Final thoughts. What key points would you like listeners to take from our interview today?
Start with your audience. Audience is so, so important in everything that you do. I think that's a super important point. And then timing, making sure that you're actually responding to people in a timely fashion, because silence can be a message too. And it's probably not the one you want to send. And then, just remember that like your job is to be honest counsel. You're not always there to seek the approval of leadership. You're there to make sure that they are doing what is right for their organization and right for the people that they serve.
I like that. As we wrap this up, is there a piece of wisdom or a motto you live by?
One that my parents actually asked me very, very early on. And it actually is the reason why my family started the nonprofit that we did about 30 years ago. Is they asked the question of, so what are you going to do about it? Oh, how are you going to solve this as a 10-year-old? And it really shifted everything from being an observer to being an actor.
Nice. How could people best reach you if they want to connect, follow up, or maybe get your services?
Yeah. LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn and our Rome website, which is romecoms.com. I'm there and would love to chat with everybody. And I just want to say thank you for having me. And thank you to your listeners for the work that they do. It is tends to be a very thankless job. They're the ones running towards things as opposed to the things that we're trying to get away from. So I just, especially as a corporate and tech PR professional, it's a very, very different world, but it's not a small thing that they do. So thank you for having me.
And thank you for being on the show, Kat.
Yeah.